Hello and welcome to the Rippling Pages with me, Liam Bishop, curating the best writers to inspire you and your writing. Today, I'm with Marni Appleton to discuss her collection of short stories, I Hope You're Happy, published by the Indigo Press. Never have the boundaries between public and private felt so brittle. Women go viral on social media for seemingly innocent reasons. Open and polyamorous relationships suddenly feel shut and closed. Roles in theatre feel too close to real life. The modern world Marni presents to us in her stories is one that feels incredibly liberating, but then hinged by archaic attitudes from the past all at the same time. Marni herself holds a PhD in creative writing from the University of East Anglia. Her writing has been published in Banshee, The Tangerine, Contemporary Women's Writing, but this is her first collection of short stories. Marni, delighted to have you here to celebrate the launch of this book. Welcome to the Rippling Pages.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. And as I said, you present to us a very, very interesting world, and we're going to get into that. Where is it you're joining me from? If you don't mind my asking.
London.
Thanks for joining me from London. Just before we get going, remember to share, follow, subscribe to the Rippling Pages. Tell your friends about it if you enjoy the show, and of course, feel free to leave a review as well on your favorite podcast provider. But let's get into it, Marni, shall we? And as I said, it's an interesting world that you present to us. And it's not a world that I would say feels entirely unsafe. And it does feel very modern, very contemporary, in where you situate your stories. But there's always this sense of, I felt, that there's always something that's slightly out of control of the characters in the stories.
Well, I was thinking a lot about the kind of contrasting ways that women and girls are spoken about and spoken to in popular media. So on the one hand, there's, an epidemic of violence against women and girls. We've got growing popular misogyny with figures like Andrew Tate. Yet we're told that we've never had it so good, and we, in some respects, we haven't. We're encouraged to look at women who are succeeding in high places, and they're very visible to us now. So there's this real sort of contrast that interested me. And through thinking about that, I became really interested in the kinds of feelings that women are encouraged to exhibit in the world. So things like positivity and confidence, which seem like inherently good things. Like, why not feel positive and confident if you can? But what's interesting about those feelings is it shifts the responsibility for the way the individual woman or girl's life turns out onto them, and away from any kind of social or cultural structures that shape their lives. So I was really interested in how much of our lives is under our control, basically, and what is the benefit of making us feel like our lives are under control when it's not entirely under our control. And everybody's life is shaped by where they're born, where they live, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm interested in the two extremes, being people who feel entirely passive to the forces that shape their lives, and people who feel like they can change absolutely everything about their lives and that it's entirely something of their own creation.
So talking then about these kind of ideas of forces and control, what you've spoken about there is, it sounds like some really kind of quite powerful forces. Are these characters then trying to achieve a balance, trying to navigate this? How did you set out to plot these characters' journeys within these kind of big themes?
The characters all have differing levels of the sense of how much control they have over their own lives. And I've been very interested in social media influencers and celebrity culture for this reason, who aren't necessarily the day-to-day, like people living their ordinary lives, but they are, that they have a sense of how they're perceived in the world. And they also project a lot onto other people, like all their followers and that sort of thing. But how those people are perceived isn't entirely shaped by them, even though they might like to think that it is. And so I guess with the characters in the stories, they're simultaneously under the thrall of those people. They're receiving messages about how their lives can be. Some of them experience, like, for example, in Road Trip, the character in that story, she feels like entirely passive. Like, she's like, oh, whatever, stuff will happen to me, and I'm kind of floating along with it. She takes no responsibility. Whereas other characters really try and push against the world as they see it, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't.
There's a line that happened. This is from the first story, and you talk about social media and that kind of thing. This idea of control. You'll never know when it's your turn in the spotlight, and it's just these experiences of the world of social media seem slightly different. Well, seem different for how they're mediated through women's experiences and, as a result, your character's experiences. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I think with that line, what I was thinking about was how, with the prevalence of social media, fame becomes kind of accessible to everyone, in that we can all, anybody with a smartphone can post things online, which can gain enough traction to, go viral and that sort of thing, and they can become something that, millions of people see. However, it's not as simple as you post something and you think this is going to go viral and it goes viral. What gets selected to go viral feels really random. And so it could be somebody who is posting in a private account to a very small number of people, and somehow that snowballs. Or it could be, people who are really, really trying to go viral and build their followers, and they just can't do it. So I suppose with social media, fame seems something that's accessible but also inaccessible, and also it seems quite random. Whereas I think in the past, fame would be something that was planned for you and, bestowed upon you, rather than something that you could seek. And in the story Shut Your Mouth, the people who go viral do so against their will. They don't even post the photos that go viral. And the character who says that line, is that that's her perception of it, that at some point everybody gets a moment in the spotlight, and you don't have any control over what that's for or why that happens.
Yeah, what is it then that the characters do in this story that launches this moment in the spotlight, so to speak?
The story is set in a world where photos of women eating have gone viral, and it's kind of become a trend. And this group of older women have had photos taken of them without their consent while they've been enjoying a meal together. And because they're enjoying the meal so much, the photos are great, and it's got lots of great food in it. The women try and take the restaurant to court for allowing the photos to be taken of them against their will, and that kind of sparks a backlash against them, because the people who enjoyed the photos feel like they're being taken away from them unfairly, because once they've entered the public realm, they feel like they're their photos to enjoy.
The story is called Shut Your Mouth, and if I love the title of the story, because it's the first story, and it's this very, very bold title. It's got so much force in it. It's got so much like vigor in it. And I wonder then, just in relation to this story, who, and considering what happens to the women, who is it that needs to shut their mouth?
Well, I think with the title, I quite like titles that can be read in more than one way. Hence, the overall title for the collection, I Hope You're Happy, appealed to me because it's something that sort of can be read in a positive way and a negative way and that sort of thing. And I think with Shut Your Mouth, I felt like it was powerful because it's sort of like a throwaway comment sometimes, like something you might say among friends, but it also feels like quite a forceful criticism, like, shut your mouth, basically, don't stop talking. And I think with the older women who are essentially told to shut their mouths and stop complaining, so that's what they're being told. And what's interesting about them is that because they're people who in their day-to-day lives, they do have a degree of power. Like the woman who says the line about her moment in the spotlight is an older businesswoman, and she is an authoritative figure to the young girl who is the narrator of the story. But she sees her reduced by social media to being silenced. I think throughout the story, just in various situations, it gradually builds. So from these photos, it builds to women and girls choosing to hide their mouths because of the effect of this trend. And that idea came to me from just thinking about the way things shift and morph as they become trends on social media. Like, you think sometimes something is seen as positive and then something happens to it and then it becomes something that there's a backlash to, and things just morph and take on different meanings as they're shared in different contexts.
I mean, you only have to look at the contents of your stories to perhaps see where these stories are going, and they have these really kind of snappy titles, and indeed the title of the collection, I Hope You're Happy, which you capitalize within the text as well, which I was delighted to see. Yeah, there's always this question of how and if we can balance our public and private selves. How hard is this challenge then for some of the characters?
Yeah, I think it's very hard for all of the characters, and I think it's hard for everyone. And this is something, again, that I think is exacerbated by social media, because we construct a specific presentation of ourselves for the world. And whether if you're not, even if you're not seeking fame or anything like that, you still, as you post on Instagram or something, you still are hoping people will take certain things away from that. So you want to be seen as clever, or you want to be seen as fashionable or into books or whatever it is. Every single time you post, you're trying to get something from the audience, who is your followers, which may just be people that you know in real life, or it might be, a kind of wider unknown audience. So I'm very interested in the way that people both present themselves to the world, and in the way that people are presented to us in a way that might not be true to who they are, but for certain effects like PR campaigns and that sort of thing. But I think all of us want to be perceived in a certain way, and we all also have an inner life which maybe doesn't correspond with the self that we're trying to present to the world. And that's just something I'm really interested in exploring in my writing.
Can that I understand that, and I agree with that, but does that pre-exist social media?
I think it does pre-exist social media, but I suppose social media is, for me, one of the most fascinating ways to see it unfold. Like, somebody that you might know in real life as being a bit shy, then on social media is really, kind of presenting a bold persona or something like that. And I think it might happen when you see people in different contexts. Like, if you see people with their family and then you see them with a different group of friends, you see how they shift and change. And it can be difficult to track which is the real person. And I just find that so fascinating.
What does that tell you then as a writer? I guess why as a writer write about this? What fascination does it hold for the writer, as opposed to the sociologist or the filmmaker, for argument's sake? We can all post reels and make films of ourselves, but what fascination does it hold to the writer in terms of writing about this phenomenon?
I think it provides a lot of creative opportunities. So in the collection, I write a lot about, or I've got a couple of stories in there about theatre, and there's only really one story that's explicitly about social media. But in all of those stories, that some of the characters are complete enigmas, because you don't see from their perspective, you don't see their thoughts. You have like a character who's observing them and trying to understand them. And I think that's really interesting, to have a perception from the point of view of a character, but then the reader themselves looking at it might notice different, or hopefully will notice different things that the character doesn't. And that just reflects what it's like to go through the world, but in a more creative way.
I don't know if you just want to talk a little bit then about theatre and the two stories that speak, because you do talk about theatre quite differently, I would say, in those two stories.
Yeah, so the first story, which is called Cowboy Superhero Spaceman Monster, is about someone who's working on an immersive theatre production. And she's one of the characters, I would say, who's very much like, oh, life happens to me and I just go with it. She sort of feels like she doesn't have any agency. So she gets swept up in this performance, and her life starts to mirror things that happen in the performance, and the boundaries become very blurred at the end. And then the other story is about which is called Intimacy, a bartender who works at a theatre where a mysterious production is taking place. And she's also an actress, so she gets an audition for this production, and then things start to get a bit weird. And she realizes that lots of other people she knows have also been called in for the audition. I think with that one, I was more thinking about how it can feel as though women in the public eye get a brief moment, and it's very difficult to stay being relevant, stay being the new thing, stay interesting in a way that I don't think it has been for men. Although obviously another character who in the world who I find super interesting is Taylor Swift, who is one of the epigraphs to my collection as well. But she is somebody who has managed to keep reinventing herself to stay relevant. But I think what's so fascinating about that is she has had to reinvent herself. She can't just stay as she is, bringing out like presenting in the same way. She's had to present in very different ways, and without that, and without all the the PR crises and all that sort of thing, would she still be relevant, and would we still be interested in her even if she was bringing out really good music? I don't really know.
I tell you what, we are going to have a quick break on the Rippling pages. Do come back, though. We're going to be talking more about I Hope You're Happy by Marni Appleton with Marni Appleton. If I opened a bookshop, it would look like the Rippling Pages podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, like the sound of Marni's book, you can buy Marni's book at the Rippling Pages bookshop. Now, it's not a real bookshop. It's an online bookshop hosted by bookshop.org. Buying through here is great. I absolutely love it. All books are sourced by indie bookshops. And if you use the Rippling Pages bookshop, I get a very small commission from any books sold, which is super, super helpful. It helps me running the show, tech upgrades, website hosting, all that kind of thing. All of this really does help and support. And obviously, you're buying the books of the writers on the show. So there's a link in the show notes to the Rippling Pages bookshop, and you'll be able to see Marni's book there on after the show. Okay, we're going to get back into it. I will see you soon. These characters live, different lives, or there seems to be a sense that they live different lives. There's a really fantastic, brilliant sentence that I've picked out, and I love it because it just for the story Chastity, the way that you write about the relationship that the main character Harry has with her partner, and then this colleague at work, and he just gives a clue to that in the I think it's on the opening page of the story. Some people stayed for more drinks after they closed, but before long they began yawning and saying their goodbyes, heading off to catch night buses or meet up with others, continue the night's adventures. And it's that idea of night's adventures. There are, people don't go home and shut the doors and draw the curtains. There are other things going on within the world. There's lives beyond what we see.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's something that I'm always trying to think about, that none of our choices and none of the things that happen to us occur in a vacuum. So all of the choices that Harry makes throughout that story in particular are shaped by the expectations placed on her by the world at large. And she's not being literally forced into anything. Everything that she does is a choice that she makes, and she makes relatively considered choices, I think. But it's undeniable that she lives in a world where money is very important, like wealth is very important, as it is to everyone, having access to money, and a world in which a monogamous marriage, is something that is like an unspoken directive that her life is heading towards. And I think that is the case for pretty much all women, especially, straight women, that's expected, that's what you want. Because I think a story, like a social media account, it's one person, it's all very focused on one person. And I think all of us in our lives are very focused on one person, which is ourselves, because you have to be, even if you're the most generous person and you're giving all your time for lots of different causes, you still have to think about what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, and all that sort of thing. However, all of those things happen inside these grander systems, and it's undeniable that those impact on the choices that we make in our day-to-day life, even if it is just about what we're going to wear.
The focus in these stories isn't men, but I just wondered then if you could just tell us then about some of the choices that you made in writing about the men that are in these stories, because your way that you write about Fred, for instance, I found really interesting some of the verbs that you use to describe it, and in particular how you describe sort of the way he is with Harry.
I was quite conscious of not wanting to center the men in the stories too much, but equally not wanting them all to be terrible because, I don't think that's what the world is like. I think even though we do live in a patriarchy and everything favors men in lots of situations, it's not the case that individual men themselves are horrible. And especially the kinds of men that these characters would choose to be in relationships with, and they do have a choice on who to be in a relationship with. And I think that the reasons that Harry chooses Fred as a partner are because he makes her feel safe in some ways that she didn't have growing up and that she really values highly. However, the reason that she wants to explore something else with the colleague is because he's not fulfilling her in every way she would like to be fulfilled, shall we say. But I think that's the case in any relationship. Like, I think nobody fulfills everything for everyone. In a way, that's why I think polyamorous, or one of the reasons why polyamorous relationships have been so interesting for me to write about. Just to think about if women are really going to try and get everything that they want and try and live this ideal life, I'm not sure that would necessarily only involve one partner. Fred represents Harry going down like a well-worn path, like where everything that she is expected to want, she can get. And that's a very safe path. And that is in part why it appeals to her. However, something being that predictable is also simultaneously what doesn't appeal to her about it. So she's got this push and pull of, you can get everything that you want. And then she's thinking, but what if I want something else? And I don't know what that is, but maybe there is something else. And I just want to break out of this particular route that seems preordained for me, even though it's something that she's gone after. When she's there faced with it, in its reality, she's going, what if there's more, I guess, which is a very common feeling amongst all people, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a legitimate question, isn't it? This is why I really liked Harry and really liked I like all the story, but I really liked, that story. It was just how she's trying to manage this situation, and yeah, the dilemmas and choices that she has to make, and how she sort of manages these two. And there's the kind of comedy in there of the kind of the chastity cage and all that kind of thing. So one thing I did want to ask you, Marni, then is about mirrors, and mirrors often feature in your stories. I wondered if it was related to some of the things that we've spoken about. You've got a story called The Mirror Test. We see characters looking into mirrors quite a lot.
The Mirror Test, the story, takes its title from an essay by a writer called Melissa Febos, which is about this test that they do on animals to determine whether they've got self-awareness. So what they'll do is put the animal to sleep and put a dot of color on them, then wake them up and put them in front of a mirror. And if they investigate the thing that's been added to them, then they take that to mean that they can recognize themselves and they have awareness that something has been put on them. And I think it's sort of used to determine sort of an animal's intelligence levels. But in her essay, Melissa Febos writes about the label, particularly the label of slut, being applied to young women based on their behavior and how that can affect their sense of how they see themselves. So I was really super inspired by that essay. And actually, a quote from that essay is what the other epigraph to the collection. But I was just thinking a lot about how women and girls are spoken to and spoken about in media and how that shapes how they then go on to see themselves and shapes the kind of choices they make and the things that they do. So mirrors were really important to me for that kind of exploring that kind of idea. when thinking about how we present ourselves to the world, there's this sense that there can be a whole, like a vast self internally that does not appear in the reflection. So in what you present to the world, like people can interact with your physical self in like day to day, and you can have this feeling that there's a whole world inside you that no one knows. And yeah, so I think I sort of use mirrors to explore that idea as well.
Yeah, it's just making me think, and considering everything else that we've discussed, where are then, the safe spaces or the spaces in which we can explore these sort of inner selves?
I think because the period of life that I'm writing about in these stories is from kind of early teenagehood to kind of like, I guess, mid 20s ish. So it's very much like coming of age. And I think during that time, it can be quite difficult to figure out what is actually you and what, because you're constantly at that sort of age, basically trying to figure out who you are. And it can be difficult to understand what that is. Yeah, I think in the book it's trying to figure out who the characters are trying to figure out who they are and where that safe space is. And I'm not sure that the collection comes to any sort of conclusions about that being a possibility, which sounds quite bleak, but maybe it's true.
Because we've spoken about it quite a lot, where, are there spaces in which, whether it's in the books or in life in general. There's a line you write, actually: we know nothing about these parts sealed up in the liquid darkness of our bodies, which is a hell of a line. But yeah, just the depths of, sort of our inner selves. It's straight. So, I mean, you spoke about where some of these characters are from in terms of their age and that kind of thing. And there is it just feels like there's an attempt to weave sort of different registers through the text. So I won't say it's register, more like a certain kind of discourse, and you've spoken about social media. Was that a conscious thing within the craft, or is that something that emerged once you reached the subject matter? I just think about some of the terms that you use or that the characters use within their sort of inner discourse about the world around them.
In Margot, for example, the story Margot, she is in a sort of active process of when meeting up with her childhood best friend as an adult. She's trying to reconcile the childhood self who she shared fully with her friend and the adult self who she's deliberately keeping at a distance from this same friend. So I think the different kinds of language that she uses reflect that process of this sliding back and forth between selves and ages and that sort of thing. And in Positive Vibes, which is the story that's about Instagram, the positive messages from the influencers' Instagram kind of crop up throughout the story, just because I was interested in how weirdly sinister those upbeat messages feel out of the context of social media. Like, I think a lot of people go on social media and see those kinds of posts, and you might be like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll have a positive day. Thanks for that, random influencer. But when you see them in a story, in the life of someone who's struggling with all these different things, they actually do feel quite controlling and coercive and, yeah, just separated from context. I do think they feel very sinister to me anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of it is like that. It's like a different language altogether. But yeah, there's a caption here I've got from one of the Instagram posts or whoever in whatever social media form it is within Positive Vibes. Start now, start today, start here, start with all your doubts and fears inside you. Start and don't give up. Start now and don't stop. Start today, guys. I believe in you. A more positive you is just around the corner. Namaste. Praying hands wave stars. And yeah, you see it's 10 a penny on social media, isn't it? But it's just, yeah, I guess it's going back to this idea then of situating those stories within that context and where they exist. You're giving us a little insight, but give us a little insight into your journey to getting this book published. Just reflecting on your kind of writing journey.
So I wrote this collection of stories as part of a PhD. So half of the PhD was this collection of short stories, and the other half was a critical essay on like women's short story writing in general in the last sort of 10 years. So, and feminism and that sort of thing. So I was thinking quite critically about feminism at the time I was writing it, which I think has influenced it So it probably took about 4 years to write it, which is how long it took me to do my PhD. For the listeners, obviously this is my first published book. However, I was writing before I did my PhD. I was writing for, a few years. I wrote a novel that didn't get me an agent or anything, and I wrote lots of stories, some that were published, some that weren't. And I think sometimes, especially with debut books, it seems like people just sat down and wrote a book and then it got published, and that's really not often the way.
Hard work, isn't it? Whatever it is, I think.
I was just going to say, I also think that you kind of do need to write a lot before you publish a book. And so you kind of need to approach your first book as like just as almost knowing it's not going to get published, but it's going to teach you a lot about writing. Because now I think I'm so much better of a writer than I was when I wrote my first novel, which I finished when I was like 23 or something. I thought it was amazing. And then you go back to it and you're like, it's not bad, but it's just that I've learned so much more now through the process of writing something to completion, like spending a lot of time, years on projects and being like, yeah, it's a lot more than just sort of sitting down and writing X number of words. There's a lot of revision, a lot of research, a lot of hard work, I guess, like you're saying. I think I initially thought, if you write a book, it will get published, and then you sort of realize that actually no, you have to write a good book. It's not enough to kind of just write. You can't just, it's because it is hard. Like as you're doing it, you're like, God, it's really hard to get to the end of this, writing this huge thing, and it is. So you kind of at the end you're like, right, well, it should get published now, and then or maybe just me and like my youthful naivety, but then and then you realize that actually it's harder than you thought. You have to climb another mountain.
Well, top tip for Rippling Pages listeners: don't just write a book, write a good book, and you'll increase your chances of being published. Well, you've written a good book, Marni, and it's called I Hope You're Happy. It's out now, and it's published by Indigo Press. But for now, Marni, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining me on the Rippling Pages.
Thank you for having me.